Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today to talk about the accountability for perpetrators and redress for victims in Bahrain. This is a webinar hosted by Salam for Democracy and Human Rights with the very welcome contribution by No Peace Without Justice, Niccolo Figa-Talamanca. Sorry if I mispronounced your name, Niccolo. Please correct me when I go wrong. Is joining us from No Peace Without Justice. Today, we're going to talk about almost like the trajectory of the kind of human rights problems in Bahrain. And 2020 has been very important for a couple of reasons, not just because of COVID, of course, but because in recent weeks, the European Union has enacted a global human rights sanctions regime that looks like it could shape relations or elements of relations with Bahrain in the coming years, notably about specific individuals. And secondly, because Bahrain itself has announced a national action plan for human rights. So in the context of those changes, we wanted just to explore accountability for perpetrators and redress. And with us to discuss this are two students who very kindly offered to work as interns with Salam for Democracy and Human Rights. I'll go through the participants in today's seminar in alphabetical order, however. So Amelie Bamford is a third-year undergraduate student at Lancaster University in politics and French. Yousif Almuhafdha is, who I think is probably known to a number of people who may be watching, is the vice president of Salam for Democracy and Human Rights. And of course, he was a long-term member of Bahrain Center for Human Rights. Tara Rayner O'Grady herself is a board member of Salam for Democracy and Human Rights, but also the Secretary General of the Human Rights Sentinel. Been involved with Bahrain work for quite a long time. Niccolo Figa-Talamanca is the Secretary General of No Peace Without Justice. It's a European human rights organization, I think the brainchild of Emma Bonino, a former European commissioner. And Niccolo, who I don't know well, but as far as I understand, has had a huge amount of interaction with international human rights and criminal justice institutions and accountability processes. Last, certainly not least, Amy Whittle, also a third-year university at Lancaster University in the UK, and she's doing history and politics. So I want to start off, in fact, with the human rights, the global human rights sanctions regime. Where did it come from? How did it come about? And for this, I'd like to turn over to Amelie and her work and ask her a little bit about where did it come from? What is the background to the EU's global human rights regime? What inspired it? Of course, we hear a lot about the sort of Magnitsky provisions. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Hi, Drewery, and hi, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. I've just prepared a few slides just to give some background information to everyone who's watching. So just 1 second while I set this up.
Looks like it's working.
Is everyone able to see what the slides?
Switch window. Yeah, I can. I don't know if others can.
Are the slides up here just to confirm before I start?
For me, it's blank. For me, it's white at the moment.
Okay. 1 second. I'll try and get this sorted. I'll try again. Sorry about this, everyone.
if it doesn't work, you can just kind of talk us through it.
Okay, I think I'll just talk through it. Let's scrap the slides. Okay, so first and foremost, good afternoon to everyone who are kindly joining us today and those who are listening to this after the event. I hope you found this information given from our amazing specialists and interns valuable and interesting in understanding the questions surrounding the accountability for perpetrators and the address for victims of gross human rights abuses, particularly in Bahrain. Firstly, my camera. Is it on now? Yes, okay. So firstly, it would be important to initiate our discussion from where it all began. The Magnitsky Act, which later goes on to inspire and influence several other sanctions framework worldwide, such as the EU's Global Human Rights Sanctions Framework. The Act was a bipartisan law enacted in 2012 by President Obama, which placed sanctions on 18 Russian officials in the name of the Russian government on fabricated evidence. In an effort to conceal allegations of high-level corruption. While Magnitsky was in pre-trial detention, he died in 2009 following alleged mistreatment and torture. Following on from this, in 2016, Congress expanded its regulations to become the Global Magnitsky Act, which allows sanctions against human rights abuses in many parts of the world. Now I'm going to follow on from this and start introducing and talking about the process for the introduction of the Global Human Rights Sanctions regime, which was introduced by the European Union. It was first proposed by the Netherlands in 2018, and consequently 28 EU members met to discuss the Dutch proposal in a paper called Towards an EU Global Human Rights Sanctions Framework, which was the beginning of a rather long process to the Act's implementation. The paper claimed that the proposed sanctions regime differed significantly from the existing EU geographically limited sanctions regimes, as it states that it aims to change state behaviour, which therefore marks them political in nature. It claimed that it will follow similar legal framework as the UK Magnitsky-style sanctions, as at the time there was no formal mechanisms for the EU to impose sanctions on people suspected of human rights abuses. This was followed by European foreign ministers agreeing on December 2019 to commence preparatory work for global sanctions regime to address serious human rights abuses. In March 2020, 46 members of the EU Parliament wrote an open letter to High Representative Joseph Borrell, calling on the EU to push ahead on the adoption of the new regime and to prevent any halting of the introduction process. In September 2020, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, stated she intends to create a system for such initiative. In her most recent State of Union address, she affirms, "We need a mechanism to impose sanctions if human rights are violated." As mentioned previously, the results of the vote on the application of the sanctions regime was issued almost 2 weeks ago, in which a unanimous decision was made, and the EU will now begin its process in formally applying the sanctions framework to those who will appear on the designations list. However, it is important to note, as always, that it will be up to France, Germany and Italy to decide the scope and strength of the sanctions regime. This will raise problems when all member states have to unanimously agree on designations, effectively giving states with a lower regard to human rights the power to veto. The current framework of the EU Global Human Rights Sanctions regime includes a prevention of targeted people from travelling to Europe, freezing assets of both officials and entity-like organisations, companies or banks, and outlawing Europeans from making funds available to those engaged in serious human rights violations. The criteria to be considered for designation on the EU sanctions framework include those who have committed crimes against humanity, including genocide, slavery, extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, and arbitrary arrests or detentions. Those responsible for human trafficking, sexual violence, and abuses of freedom of peaceful assembly, expression, or religion will likewise be pursued. Those who facilitate, incite, promote, or support those who financially profit from human rights violations will also be included in the criterion of this sanctions framework. However, they do not specify corruption as a headline criterion and make no mention to individuals who've been made stateless, prompting criticism by some advocacy groups and MEPs. There have been projections made of those who are likely to be included on the designation list, which include individuals and one entity from the Iranian government who appeared on EU regulation paperwork from 2011 onwards, as well as those involved in the assassination of Saudi journalist Khashoggi and Myanmar military generals involved in the systematic violence and genocide on the Rohingya people. It does not seem likely that Bahraini human rights abusers will be included straight away. However, they could be added in due time, as there has been previous evidence that's shown in EU Parliament to foreshadow that the European Parliament is interested in enforcing sanctions against Bahrain after the detention of the peaceful protester and activist Nabil Rajab. However, there's no finalised designations that have been confirmed by the European Parliament, so I think it's very important just to keep our eye open on that. Similar sanctions framework have been administered by Canada, their newest addition to the list being the perpetrated winner of the Belarusian election, Alexander Lukashenko, as well as his son, the National Security Advisor, Viktor Lukashenko, as well. The Baltic states of Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania have also introduced such sanctions before the EU Parliament have actually implemented the global human rights sanctions framework. And they are heavily weighted towards sanctions against Russian officials just due to their proximity to Russia. Sanctions framework have also been initiated by the United Kingdom this year, which include a wide range of human rights violators from Russia, Saudi Arabia and Myanmar. However, it's important to talk about the lack of Bahraini people and the Gulf region human rights violators on this list, as I think it's very important for the United Kingdom to hold these people, and all the European Union, to hold these people to account, to give justice to the victims of serious human rights abuses, especially after the 2011 spring Arab protests in the region. So yeah, that's my little spiel done.
Thanks, Emily. That's very helpful. That's an overview. Of course, the slides would have been nice, but it was difficult to follow. My immediate takeaway from what you've been saying is that it's a question of the bloc, the European Union bloc themselves getting together and saying that such and such a specific individual is not able to come to the European Union, is not able to engage with businesses or assets that are connected to the European Union. But what it does not say, it seems to me, is that the person that we are naming definitely is guilty of a particular crime. They're saying, from what I understand from what you're saying, is the European Union is suggesting we think we have evidence that so and so has committed these acts, but it's not justice. It doesn't follow through with a process through which these allegations can be explored. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It doesn't provide full justice to the victims. I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a limitation to this sanctions framework.
Said Yousif, you have been involved with the human rights situation in Bahrain for many years. Does this sound good? Is this the kind of regime, this practice that holds promise? Do you think it has potential to help the human rights situation in Bahrain?
Yes, I mean, definitely. I think regulation.
Can everyone hear Said Yousif okay? No. Said Yousif, we have difficulty with hearing you.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Very weak for me, but I suppose if I listen carefully, yes. Try again. Try again.
You can try with another
Yeah, perhaps.
another
Tara, turning to you. Look, you live in Ireland. You've got an Irish background. It's a place where forms of accountability and redress have been practiced, maybe not perfectly. What is your thought? What's your thinking with your experience of Bahrain about how the new EU provisions can change things, can change a discourse in Bahrain? Is there potential for this measure to change anything?
Well, Drewery by nature, I'm an optimistic person, but unfortunately, experience tells me that we need to be quite practical in our consideration of this. I suppose that looking at how the Bahraini regime put out red notices, Interpol red notices, on people who were human rights defenders, and made travelling to the United Nations or to the European Parliament or wherever they were going for advocacy purposes, made their lives very, very difficult, and it created a really stringent environment for them, either leaving the country or coming back into the country. It doesn't inspire confidence in me. It's got a long way to go, and there's a lot that we can do to encourage and to help support and strengthen I suppose, this new trademark that's coming out of Europe. But looking at what's happened in Ireland recently in the last few months with regards to the bloody Sunday demonstrations in 1972, when 14 people were killed, and only one soldier, here we are almost 50 years later, and only one soldier was held up in charges. And indeed, too, there's now no public inquiry from the British government over the 1989 murder of Pat Finucane, the solicitor in Belfast, who was murdered in front of his family. So we all have our natural allies, and we can only, I suppose, remain hopeful and do what we can in our own capacity, whether we're human rights defenders, lawyers, or however we are engaging to encourage what's happening and to remain optimistic.
Thanks, Tara. Finally, very, very quickly, briefly, Niccolo, from what you've heard, what you understand from these provisions, is it the kind of thing that no peace without justice would welcome?
As I think it was very well pointed out, there are deficiencies in what was adopted, but we have to look at this tool for advocacy. The fact that it's there allows us to concentrate and ask for something specific. When a chief torturer is received as a dignitary at the European Union in Brussels, what we can ask for is limited. Why are you receiving him? Why do you give him honor? Why do you give him legitimacy? The fact that this is a non-judicial process, this is an explicitly political process, in some ways, it's helpful because it forestalls the usual answer, which is, well, if there is no charges pending, what are we supposed to do? He's a head of state, or he's a foreign minister, or he's a minister of the interior. Right now, we have an expressly political process for which we can demand for political accountability, not only of those who are engaged in human rights violations, but of the European states that effectively empower violators by tolerating them and giving them legitimacy, legitimizing their violence, and legitimizing violence as a way to gain power. So as far as I can tell, the main obstacle in this ever being used is that it requires unanimity by the 27. I'm sorry, I've not gotten used to the new number. Yeah, 27 member states.
Me neither. None of us.
And which means that if Malta objects, or if Cyprus objects, or if Hungary objects, or if any of the members object because of whatever reason, then the sanctions don't go through. This makes it very, very hard, but it is somehow inbuilt in the wider deficiency of the decision-making process of the Union, which is by consensus. So we work under a consensus regime, and this comes under, because it is foreign policy in a way, rather than justice, or rather than interior, or rather than finances. I mean, it comes under the foreign policy rubric, and as foreign policy, it essentially becomes a veto area for any member state. This is the weakness. But as with other mechanisms, are in themselves essentially useless. I mean, even the most celebrated ones, like the UPR and the United Nations, they rely on states reporting on themselves. They are, in the face of them, not very serious. I mean, Bahrain reporting on Bahrain, but they are an opportunity to focus advocacy. They are an opportunity to demand action when there is an avenue, even though the avenue might be politically impossible. It still requires one member state to say no. One member state has to wear the fact that they are objecting to sanctions when another member state or the vice president, the high representative, proposes a specific name. So what does it mean in practice? In practice, it means that even if perhaps nobody from a country which, despite its small size, has very outsized friendship networks, Bahrain is essentially protected by the UAE umbrella of lobbying and by the Saudi umbrella for what that's worth. But the Bahraini regime might never be held accountable in reality, but we do need mechanisms around which we can corral advocacy, bring witnesses, provide testimony. The fact that there is a channel to go through allows us to fill the channel with information that might not be useful to get the sanction through, but it gets the policy point made that we are dealing with a bloody regime which has been ruled by atrocities and violence, at least for the last 9 years, but in fact for longer than that. I think you're muted, Drewery. I believe, Drewery, you are still muted.
Sorry, everyone. Look, thanks, Niccolo. That's a lot to take on. That's a lot of information there. You covered a lot of ground. I guess my main takeaway from that is that it's flawed. As you say, it's a political process. It's not a justice process, but nevertheless, as you say, it provides us with an advocacy tool. I want to just park in people's brain the idea that it's an advocacy tool, and then take a step back to, something that Amelie said when she was talking, which was, well, look, this is actually for really, really serious human rights violators. And I want to ask the question, does Bahrain qualify? Is there any sense in which that any Bahraini officials would meet the standard to be liable for the sanctions? And in regard to that, I'd like to explore a little bit the context in which the government of Bahrain has engaged with international human rights mechanisms. Now, Amy Whittle has done some work on an overview of at least the past 5 years of that engagement with the human rights mechanisms. And I think that might help might shape the idea about, well, is it possible that so many Bahraini officials would come into this? So, Amy, could you tell us a little bit about your work and what you found about how the government of Bahrain has engaged with the international human rights mechanisms? Over to you.
Of course. Hi everyone. Very happy. I hope you're finding the event nice and interesting. I'm not going to put the PowerPoint up, as Amelie said, as I don't think it's going to work, but we'll go from here. So yeah, as Drewery said, I've basically been looking at the work of the UN and human rights mechanisms in the effectiveness of actually preventing human rights abuses in Bahrain. So as a bit of a background, bit of information, Bahrain have currently signed to or ratified 9 different UN treaty bodies. This is between the years of 1990 and 2011. Because of this, they're then obliged to take part in the 3 main UN human rights mechanisms. I think most of you probably know what these are, but these are the Universal Periodical Review, which happens in cycles, communication reports between the UN and Bahrain, and then treaty body articles and the concluding observation reports that they then give. So in the past 5 years, in terms of the frequency in which Bahrain have actually complied to international standards, so as I said, since 2015, there have been 39 separate special procedures reports between Bahrain and the UN. These have included violations of obligations under 17 different special reporters and mandates. Most commonly here, Bahrain have violated the promotion and protection of human rights in terms of freedom and opinion of expression, also the protection of the work and integrity of human rights defenders, and also prevention of torture and other forms of inhumane treatment. And within these reports, Bahrain have directly violated 25 separate international agreements. Most commonly here, there were poor detention facilities, acts against human rights defenders, and acts of torture or other inhumane behaviour. Sorry. And then looking more closely at the UPR cycles, there's currently been 3 of these, but focusing closely on May 2017, the most recent cycle. Bahrain received 175 recommendations from the UN within this. This was up from the 12 that they received in 2008. It's obviously a massive increase in the past decade. Out of these, 139 were supported and 36 were taken note of. And from my research, and obviously speaking to Drewery and Jawad, we've talked about in our meetings before that this can very much be seen as Bahrain disapproving with certain recommendations. When they're saying take note of, it's almost a subtle way of them showing their disapproval for what the UN is stating. These recommendations that they have disapproved tend to be related to changes to the national legal system or the allowance of more access to more adequate civil and political rights. Also, there have been 5 concluding observation reports from these treaty bodies, and very similar to the above, Bahrain have tended to give recommendation or reservations towards the recommendations that ask to change national legislation. Often, religious incompatibility is given as a reason here. So then, just a bit about what this says about Bahrain's actions and their governmental conduct. I think overall it shows that it's just really a key sign that Bahrain's internal situation is worsening rapidly. There's been a consistent increase in systematic violations and a lack of access to adequate human rights since 2015. The Bahraini government is limiting freedom of speech in many ways, and it's very much demonstrated that access to human rights has declined since the Arab Springs in 2011. Communication between Bahrain and the UN is also reducing. it's becoming very difficult to understand the internal situation within Bahrain and to also implement mechanisms to prevent abuses. And from this, we then are struggling to better align Bahrain to international standards. Bahrain has almost shown a dismissal of international standards in many ways. It can be argued that possibly this goes back to the issues of accountability in the UN. There's very few effective methods within the UN that can ensure accountability, and this has allowed abuses to continue. There's currently no way to deal with the incompatibility between national legislation and international standards. Bahrain have then been able to justify their laws and actions without much consequence. And then finally, there's a real sort of lack of transparency between the UN and Bahrain. Bahrain have been able to carry out many violations off record and have not been sanctioned for these. And unfortunately, this is set to continue if changes aren't made nationally and internationally. So that's kind of a summary of what's been happening in the past 5 years.
That is really helpful. Am I okay, I'm not mute. Look, Amy, thank you so much. That was, I've got two immediate takeaways from that, what I noted down when you were speaking, or three, in fact. One was that poor engagement with international human rights mechanisms is like already there, it's standing, and you seem to have equated that with what seems to be what you've said is a worsening human rights situation, which is consistent logically. And the flip side would be that good engagement with international human rights mechanisms would tend towards an improving situation. So in response to, in the context of sort of accountability and redress, actually we have a pretty poor engagement from the governments of Bahrain. That's the first thing. Second thing is one point that you made, which I think is quite a strong one, is that actually there are few, if any, or basically none, methods of hard and fast accountability that are captured in the UN mechanisms, and of course above that, no enforcement. And finally, you referred to lack of transparency. I don't want to spend too much more time on this topic. That was really helpful. But Tara, just having heard that engagement or that lack of engagement, does that chime with your experience of how the governments of Bahrain engages with international human rights mechanisms?
Yes, absolutely, it does. I've been at the UN and various periodic reviews, and there, as Amy had mentioned, about hundreds of recommendations and dozens that are noted and disagreed with. But there's no independence of judiciary, there's no democratic political process, there's no nurture of civil society, there isn't a neutralization, but an eradication of voices of dissent. And the regime it's certainly not a constitutional monarchy, it is totalitarianism. And we really are really concerned. It's so alarming, and there's no ebb and flow of this alarm. It continues to mount. What a damning indictment when a child has to take to social media to plead for attention for his father, who is on death row on trumped up charges of terrorism. He's on death row, this man. He's been in prison for years.
Tara, you're referring to the case that was raised by an individual that he took to Lewis Hamilton, the F1 driver, right?
Absolutely. So clearly that's sufficiently revealing in itself.
Yeah. Look, Tara, I just want to ask you one other quick question on this, and it comes after what obviously what Amelie was talking about the EU human rights sanctions regime, and whether or not any cases would qualify. I think in years gone by, you were involved with the so-called underground hospitals in Bahrain. But what is an underground hospital? Why was it needed in 2011? And do you think that were there any of those cases that were treated by this so-called underground hospital that are actually relevant for the EU sanctions regime?
Wow, there's a very loaded question there, Drewery. Fair play. An underground hospital is it's not a physical structure. It's like a mobile medical unit. And during 2011, 12, 13, even up until now, it's absolutely impossible to receive medical care if you have been shot at, either tear gassed or with birdshot pellet. And if you present at hospital, they were investigating every single person who was brought into the hospital, and any injuries that someone had related in any way to street demonstrations meant that people were arrested and potentially disappeared and then remained in detention until there were charges that could be brought against them. And then again, you're talking about people being tortured until they confess to these trumped up charges. So with the hospital or medical care, if you like, you have to remember too that there were 48 medics who were arrested during that time. So although we have the Royal College of Surgeons from Ireland has the college over there and a great medical presence there.
Sorry, Tara, just really quickly, why were those medics arrested? Because
they upheld their Hippocratic oath to treat whoever was in front of them, whether they be police or protesters. So there just was no way for people to get medical care. And you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who had taken to the streets in a country with a naturalized population of about 600,000. So the situation was really a crisis.
I just want to be clear about this in the context of what we're talking about here. So we're saying that in 2011, there were individuals who were not treated by hospitals, who were subject to being gassed, being shot by bird shots, and that they went to private individuals' residences, maybe homes, in order to get treatment by medics, by medical professionals willing to give them treatment, who otherwise, had they been in hospitals, risked being detained, taken away, disappeared, and then possibly tortured later. Is that what we're saying?
No, Drewery, that's not what I'm saying. Okay. They did go to homes of doctors and medics because the doctors and medics were in prison.
Okay.
So why I'm saying that this underground hospital, if you like, it moved from village to village every night.
Who did the treating? Who treated those individuals? Who treated those individuals?
There were some medics. Okay. And then there were people who literally made it up as they went along. And there were people bleeding out on carpets in people's homes. So it's not like it was there was no kind of oversight or authority body taking care of this. It was people themselves trying to piecemeal medical care.
Okay, I just want to stay with this just for another second. So it was unsafe to go to medical hospitals because the risk of being taken away was too high in 2011, possibly early 2012, or mainly 2011?
12 and 13.
Okay, right through 2013.
To the beds. They were chained to trolleys, cuffed to trolleys.
Okay, so the authorities made it impossible or dangerous for individuals who had taken part in demonstrations to go to hospitals. Yes. In other words, we're saying that there was a mass structured decision to deny medical care.
Prevent
medical care. It could be tantamount to a decision of mass ill treatment.
Definitely, I agree.
Who would have made that decision?
Well, in the following year, the note for all purchase orders for medical supplies was moved to the Department of Defense. So the country was ordering, whether it was pharmaceuticals or whatever medicines or whatever was ordered through the Department of Defense. That in itself is very revealing.
Okay, so on the basis of that, let's say, evidence, we can possibly surmise that the security forces themselves had a hand in denying hundreds, if not thousands of people, structurally, medical care by making it unsafe for them to go into hospital.
Absolutely, you got the nail on the head.
Right. I mean, to my mind, as an untrained, as a non-lawyer, Niccolo is the lawyer here, and Said Yousif is the human rights activist. To my mind, that sounds like it could be grounds for civil society to say, okay, European Union, we understand that you have got this global human rights sanctions regime. We have this evidence that the state effectively denied medical care to hundreds, if not thousands of people by making it unsafe to go into hospitals. You need to take action. Niccolo, what do you think? Is there mileage in that? Is that a plausible premise on which to challenge the European Union with regard to accountability?
Thank you. What Tara has described is only one of the many aspects around the repression. The period in which the systematic and massive crimes were committed against the civilian population, in particular in March and April of 2011, but also beyond. I think there's no question that acts committed during that period by the security forces amount to crimes against humanity under any definition of crimes against humanity, including the definition under the Rome Statute, which requires that the action be part of a policy, a state policy, which in this case is obvious, and requires that it be massive and systematic, which in this case, despite the small size of Bahrain is a small country, there is the way that the security forces systematically raided homes of people who were not in the demonstrations, but they were at home, terrorizing the occupants, doing it in a way to heighten fear. Where fear was the objective at night, pre-dawn raids, masked men breaking down doors to forcibly enter homes. This type of act, combined with the obviously sectarian, racist character, both of the acts where there were sectarian insults thrown by security forces and by the target. This was predominantly, exclusively, I would say, but in any case, for the large part done against Shia. This qualifies in unquestionable as a crime against humanity or persecution. There's no question. It's almost like they intended to fit the school book definition. Now, what happened next is, of course, that they attempted to show that there would be accountability within the system of the kingdom. And they appointed the Royal Commission, which has independent in its name, which is never a good sign, the Bahrain Independent International Commission, which, despite all the pressure upon it, despite its many failings, has those findings. I mean, those are findings of the commission, of the Royal Commission, that crimes against humanity were committed in the course of the period in question. And crimes against humanity continue to be committed to date, with arbitrary arrests, with long detentions, which are politically and sectarially based. Insofar as the legal definition of what constitutes a crime against humanity, there is no question that the situation in Bahrain fits the book very clearly.
But Niccolo, I mean, those are you are making pretty big assertions about what took place in Bahrain. I don't doubt them, and I recognize that they are captured within the BICI report. But what Amelie has outlined for us, what we understand is that we don't just need to know what happened. We need to know who ordered it. And I guess my question to you, and maybe Said Yousif as well, is there a way, and maybe Tara, is there a way now, 10 years later, that we can find out who ordered those raids, who ordered all of those forms of those arrests, that torture? Is that a doable prospect?
Is it for me?
Yeah.
Well,
from your perspective.
First of all, the Royal Commission itself identifies
BICI.
Yeah, BICI. I call it a Royal Commission because it is a Royal Commission, even though it's composed of foreigners. The Royal Commission itself identifies the people in position of authority who would have been in a position to make those decisions. Secondly, Bahrain is not a country ruled following the rule of law, but it is a country that has used the law as part of its repressive regime. I make the difference between rule of law and rule by law. So they've used the legal structure as part of the oppressive mechanism. This also means that the legal structure has people in charge of every department. I mean, those are all matters of public record, and ultimately, those who bear the responsibility, the greatest responsibility, are those who have the function officially to control the police, to control the security forces, and those are by design concentrated within individuals, mostly within the royal family. So they've kept the power, they've claimed it, and they've claimed it by title as well as claiming it by de facto. So unlike other situations where the real commanders are hidden behind ambiguous roles, in this case, the people in charge are also the people who are said to be in charge by the government. So it's very easy. Who was Minister of Interior? Who was Minister of Defense? Who's the head of police? Those are easy questions to answer.
Wow. Okay. I mean, that's pretty bold. It's bold in that we are putting it forward without making an accusation that there are known people who were in charge when gross, flagrant, massive human rights violations took place, which fits what we have been talking about, fits what Amelie had outlined, and it is it's consistent with the characteristics that Ammy outlined in respect to non-engagement. And you've mentioned the BICI. You've called it a royal commission. I like that term. The Bahrain International Commission of Inquiry. It's an amazing development in a way. It promised so much, and it was a particular vision of how human rights should progress. And Bahrain does not look as if it is short of any visions for its human rights programs and its human rights ambitions. You may be aware that in the past couple of months, the government has been talking about a national action plan for human rights. Now, I myself did a little look at it and I couldn't find any substance. So in respect to BICI, just very quickly, first Tara and then Said Yousif. Tara, you were involved with Bahrain when the BICI finished its business. Could you just tell me a little bit about your engagement with it? And then I want to turn to Said Yousif and ask you, Said Yousif, after Tara, look, BICI was great. National Action Plan for Human Rights, brilliant, fantastic program, terrific. What's the problem? And if there is a problem, is there an alternative? So first, Tara, about just picking up on the points that Niccolo made about the BICI, this Royal Commission.
Well, the people who were involved with it were, they were very reputable. Sharif Bassioni, Nigel Rodley. There was tremendous hopefulness that it may actually make I suppose that it would make roads towards redress. And, initially we all read it, made exhaustive reading, but very quickly we realized that because these perpetrations were continuing, that it certainly didn't leave a good flavor in the mouth.
Are you saying it was not acted upon at all?
Well, the people who we had identified as perpetrators were they were given promotions and raises, and so it really kind of contradicted what we were seeing happening in real time. So, we didn't have much optimism in it after very quickly.
Okay, so it's a vision that promised a lot and actually delivered nothing.
That was really, I think that was because of the people who were involved in writing, in investigating and writing, and their credibility, the prestige of the work that they had already done in the past. A lot weighed on their shoulders on that. So yeah of course we thought we were really duped.
We were duped. Okay. Look. Okay. Thanks, Tara. Turning to you, Said Yousif, we in short, it looks like massive human rights violations took place. The government set in motion this BICI, Bahrain International Commission of Inquiry, what Niccolo calls a royal commission. The promises were great. It looks like it's not delivered. Is there a problem with Bahrain's vision for human rights in general? And if there is a problem with that vision, what's the alternative?
Okay, thank you. I hope you can hear me now clear. So, okay, yes. So, first of all, we have just to see the commission, the BICI recommendation. One of their recommendations that the committee responsible of implementing the recommendation should be independent. And that was not the case. So that was a committee led by the Minister of Justice, who is one of the people accused and in charge of a massive human rights violation and covering up the torture and also he's responsible for many violations in the country. So he was heading this committee, and this is one of the main problems, and that's why most of the important and essential recommendation were not implemented. And for example, if we look about few of the recommendation, if we go to the recommendation number 1251, for example, it says that the country should give the prisoners or the prisoners a chance to meet a lawyer, and also they shouldn't be away from the international, or he shouldn't be arrested for more than 2 and 3 days without meeting a lawyer or having a call or something. So, but what happened in reality after 2011, that we have seen a lot of human rights groups and even the Special Rapporteur of Enforced Disappearance, they have issued and documented many cases of people subjected to enforced disappearance. So that's 1251. Even if we go to the 1252, they recommended that the authority should have recorded investigation with the prisoners in the police station. And there are in some police station, yes, I admit, because even myself, I was arrested in Al Hura police station, where they do have this recorded investigation, but most of the prisoner of conscience are questioned in criminal investigation unit, the CID unit, where there is no camera, where there is no recorded, and most of them subjected and claim that they were tortured even recently. So this is when it comes to the accountability and preparators. And also, for example, if we talk about others, recommendation, for example, 1246 saying that there should be independent investigation of all claim of tortures according to Istanbul principle, and that was not implemented at all. Still, there is no independent committee to investigate. All of them are government bodies, and they are covering and hiding the human rights violation, and they are hiding the torture. Even the judiciary system are hiding the torture in Bahrain. The public prosecutor are hiding the torture crimes in Bahrain. So that's why this recommendation were not implemented. We have a culture of impunity in Bahrain, and it's still ongoing. And also in recommendation number 1247 in BICI, they have said clearly that there is a culture of impunity, and they should all the preparators should be taken to the trial, but this was not the case. Most of them were acquitted by the court, and then nothing happened, like all of them. And also what Hafstara have said also, that we have the case that most of those people responsible of violation are promoted by the king, and even some of them, they change their position. They are playing this game that this people in charge of torture, they give him a new position in Gulf Air or in other institution or in other government bodies, just to so this is we have this a problem, that the culture of impunity. And even we have the problem with the laws. We have the laws 56 that give immunity to all the responsible of violation. And so even it's about implementing the recommendation. And even when it comes to the law, we have also a huge problem with the law, that the law protect those responsible for the human rights violation, the official protecting those human rights violators. So that's why even
yeah. I mean, look, Yousif, thank you. That you've given a point by point takedown of just a few. I noted probably just 4 or 5 recommendations, and they're into the thousands. I haven't myself read the BICI report for years, to be honest, and that must just show how irrelevant it has, in a way, it's become. But it's sobering to be reminded that just those few points that you've given were so badly done. Okay. Given that's the case, given that the people who carried this out have not followed through with it, given that they've now got this national action plan for human rights, it doesn't look good. So what do you think civil society, what can you offer? What can Salam for Democracy and Human Rights offer as an alternative? What are some of the alternatives, and what are some of the points that you think we should be making? What are the criteria that we need to set out for this to be a going prospect, for there to be real reform? What's the option?
Well, I think if you give me just a few chance, quite a little bit time to talk about our vision for a human rights reform. So I think, because I have mentioned some of the points.
Yeah, go for it.
Yes, so we have, we have a vision of around 14 points. I have to make it very fast, try to make it as fast as possible. So I think this is Salam and vision for human rights reform in Bahrain. So we have around 14 recommendations. If I will start with number 1, adopting the concept of comprehensive human rights reform within the framework of a work project within a methodology as an introduction to rooted and sustainable political reform. This number two, we can say that presenting an integrated project for human rights reform that include the vision, goals, mechanism, and means within the framework of an action program and time plan for implementation and follow-up. This is number two, and also we can say that the necessity of harmonizing the project within the international convention and standard and a project that achieved advanced success in human rights reform. Number four, the project to be clear about how to achieve basic international human rights principles such as transitional justice, redress for victims, and reparation. Number five, an implementing of concrete steps to enhance confidence in the seriousness of the project, including the release of all prisoners of conscience, including opposition leaders and human rights leaders, establishing a comprehensive vision and program of work to implement all the recommendation of BICI and the recommendation of UPR and international human rights bodies. Also, amendment, what I have said already, amendment of local legislation and administrative decision with international charters, conventions, and treaties. And also, one very important point is the cooperation and coordination with relevant human rights organizations at home and abroad, and UN human rights bodies in preparing programs and plans for human rights reform. One important point in this regard, and special reporters to enter the country with full cooperation by the authorities. Also, restricting the National Institution for Human Rights in the framework on the Paris Principle. This is very important. This is my message to NIHR. So also number 10, restricting the judicial and official human rights oversight institution to harmonize with international frameworks, charters, and treaties to ensure their independence, justice, and fairness for the victims. And also ensure the separation of powers by enacting laws and regulation that guarantees the independence and transparency of the judiciary that protect human rights, and ensure the independence of lawyer, guaranteeing protection by law for the legal profession, allowing the law by association to operate independently without any interference by the authorities, and allow also lawyers to defend citizens without any reprisal. We have seen the cases of Mohammed al-Tajir and many other cases. Full access to information and data to all citizens, human rights bodies. Finally, reform of security agencies and full accountability for perpetrators of massive human rights violation. And this is very important. This is the subject of our event today. That's why I make the final point. Thank you.
Well, okay, those are a lot of points. I mean, the in a way, the problem is the one that, Niccolo, I'll come back to you in 1 second. The problem is, of course, that's what Niccolo and Tara have already flagged, and that's that, well, who's going to do it? It's going to be the government that's going to have to do it. So I don't know, Niccolo, you wanted to come in. What's on your mind?
Thank you, and thank you for Said Yousif. One final point on the Royal Commission. The methodology had a number of challenges, and I don't think it's useful to go back into the details, but essentially they relied on the government authorities to provide the services needed for a commission, whether it's the guard at the door or the drivers or everything else. Victims and witnesses were basically greeted the temporary premises of the commission by their own torturers. Come on, come in, have a seat. You can imagine the consequence on the capacity to do effective fact-finding. Nevertheless, the fact-finding was thorough, and the reconstruction of events, if people want to read it, is also quite striking in its in the amount of work put in, and in the fact that it's quite complete. What is, I think, the most important characteristic is the absolute disconnect between the findings and the recommendations. If you make a finding that somebody has been illegally detained, tortured, and abused for no reason, the only reasonable recommendation is to release them, send them home with apologies and potentially compensation. Not to give them another trial in a civilian court instead of a military court. It makes no sense whatsoever. If you find that abuse has been committed against people on trumped-up charges, the only reasonable recommendation is to provide redress to those people as victims, not to give them another harrowing trial, as many people have been given. Many more years of fake trials, perfectly within the confines of the recommendation of the BICI, who wanted more fair trials where the charges were trumped up in the first place. If your findings is that the people are being tortured and that the police are torturing people, the recommendation cannot be that the police needs training. You don't need training not to torture people. You just need to stop doing it. Training for the purpose of preventing torture only makes sense when there is some people that beyond their orders, beyond the system, are doing something which is usually not allowed, but they are individually in need of individual training. When you have a system that is designed to torture people, training is useless. What you need, and the only thing you need, is that those who gave orders be held to account. Training might be good for the training institutions, including the British police, and sadly the Syracuse Institute of Bassioni himself, that did a lot of the training subsequent to the court. But it's useless to prevent torture when the torture is something which is a consequence of order. Order the torture to stop. And that is all the report needed to say, and perpetrators to be held to account as a sign and as a signal of change. So, I mean, as much as the fact-finding is admirable in the circumstances that were not the good circumstances, the recommendations and the fact that the king accepted in full those recommendations smell a bit fishy, in that they seem to be negotiated irrespective of the facts that were found by the commission itself. So that's why I call it a royal commission. I mean, it essentially, if it is in fact the case that the king read the findings on the same day that they were published and immediately accepted all the recommendations, then it seems to be a bit odd that they are so distant from the findings of fact. I think there's I find Said Yousif's shopping list of human rights reforms fantastic, and I think they are what we should work towards to. But I think there's a problem more fundamental than that. Every window dressing of human rights reform that was ever invented by men or women on earth has been implemented in Bahrain. They say that they now need cameras in the interrogation rooms. Okay, well, let's rename the interrogation rooms as waiting rooms and have other interrogation rooms with cameras where people are being beaten up in the waiting rooms and not in the interrogation rooms so that they cannot be shown on camera. Let's rename things. let's say that we're engaging with the UPR and so that the people and countries have an excuse and an alibi not to do anything. And in the meanwhile, lobby hard through Saudi Arabia and the UAE to prevent even the mildest rebuke that was traditionally established as a joint resolution at the Human Rights Council on Bahrain, that every year reviewed the situation and provided even the mildest formal recommendation. Even that was essentially defeated by the hard lobby of neighboring Gulf states. I think all the steps that Say Yousif mentioned are useful, but only if they are part of genuine commitment to end the torture, to end the imprisonment, to end the ongoing human rights violation, not as another excuse to set up another system, to set up another alibi for countries, including European countries, since we started the conversation about the European individual sanction regime, to simply have another reason to say, oh no, but they're working on it, we have to give them time. Yeah. Time is only useful if the direction is the right one. Time is detrimental if the direction is the wrong one.
Niccolo, I just want to pick you up on one thing. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I totally agree. I understand completely. I want to come back to just that one point you said, genuine commitment. Short of comprehensive political change, how can there be this genuine commitment? Is it about coming full circle, coming back to what Ammy had highlighted? Is it about just a greater engagement and transparency and openness with the human rights mechanisms? Or are you hinting that, well, actually, because BICI itself failed, actually it is political change that is needed?
Look, I mean, ultimately, political change should be a fact of life, and change in politics it's a sign of being alive. And the country is not alive politically if it has the same prime minister for umpteenth decades since independence. Now, peace be upon him and rest in peace. That prime minister, may he have the peace that he denied to so many. And political change has come through generational change, perhaps, or has the possibility of coming through generational change. I don't think you need. I don't think anybody, particularly within the human rights community, is advocating for a change of regime in Bahrain. Mm-hmm. This was certainly an option for political leaders in the opposition to do so at various points, but there was, I think, a decision made by human rights leaders and political leaders not to challenge the existence and legitimacy of the monarchy itself. And it's their decision, and I'm not going to double guess them or on that. There are some things that can be indicators, though. They can be indicators of a willingness to change. There are indicators of the genuine nature of the reform. First of all, stop the torture. It doesn't take much. Just stop doing what you're doing. Secondly, stop the illegal detentions. Release the political prisoners. You don't need a new commission, new mechanism of human rights, new whatever. Release the people who are illegitimately, illegally, and arbitrarily detained. It's very simple. It's one decision to be made. And now the response that they give is the independent judiciary. That is clearly dross. The judiciary is not independent. Those are decisions which are made politically, and a political decision can be made today to release the political prisoners. No manner of human rights plan of action is worth anything if the people still remain in jail. So a lot of steps can be taken today to indicate a genuine interest in reform, today, without any further mechanism.
Okay, look, we thank you so much, Niccolo. That's a real call to action and a call to actually just be more vigilant about the conduct of the government. We are coming to an end. We've only got a few minutes left. I wanted to turn it back to Tara, if you've got any final thoughts or questions, and then back indeed to Amelie and Amy. Just their reflections about what they've heard, how it informs what they themselves have looked at in terms of their own work. Just any sort of final thoughts that you might want to add to what you've heard from Niccolo or Said Yousif, and indeed Said Yousif and Niccolo, if you want to come back at the very end, that's good too. So Tara, any things?
Yeah, I'll be brief. As Niccolo had said, absolutely hats off to Said Yousif for his shopping list of human rights requests. And then my big quote takeaway from today was from Niccolo: "May he have the peace that he denied to so many."
I heard that too, yeah.
Niccolo, beautiful. My final thought is that we're seeing at the moment on Netflix, anybody who's having some time on their hands to watch TV at all, there's a dramatization of the British royal family in a show that's called The Crown, which is making headlines all across the place at the moment. The Bahraini royal family will not have that ability to see themselves on the silver, because their story is going to be played out on the stage of the International Criminal Court.
Ooh, right, okay. Very challenging. Was that it? Am I cutting into you?
There is nothing left to say.
Yeah. Amy, any thoughts that you thank you so much for your work and you're quite, I took down some of the notes about what you accountable. 25 violations, 39 submissions, 17 special rapporteurs. I mean, it is another shopping list, but not a very good one.
No, definitely not.
So what's your takeaway on what you've heard?
Mainly, this has been really interesting. Thank you very much. There's a lot I can add to the research that I'm doing now. So thank you for that. And also, mainly, I agree with everything that's been said. As we've mentioned earlier, it's obvious that the human rights record of Bahrain has declined rapidly in the past decade, especially since 2011 with the revolts. And I think this has very much been manifested through the key issues we've explained, such as lack of accountability, poor transparency, and lack of sanctions, things like that. I think a key issue we've spoken about is the lack of independence of different bodies, like inquiry bodies. I think that the main is, I think there's been massive progress in terms of making inquiry bodies and allowing people to speak out more. But I think we're in a situation now where it's less about what people are saying and more about what we can do about that. I think it's great that people are able to speak out and that there are activists, obviously externally, who can support that cause. But I think a lot more needs to be done in terms of actually working out the Bahraini system, and then, as I said before, aligning them better to the international system, and then making changes at a national and international level. But yeah.
Thanks, Amy. Amelie, any final thoughts from you about what you were looking at? I mean, one thing that struck me is when Niccolo and Tara and indeed Said Yousif were speaking is that some of the things that they were talking about, some of the events actually met the criteria for your outlining of the Magnitsky measures, and then subsequently the EU human rights sanctions regime. Is there anything else? What are your thoughts now?
Hi, Drewery. So I think overall, I think it's just really important that the states that have implemented the sanctions framework do comply with it, and they hold these perpetrators to account. I think the only way in which the sanction framework can work is if there's collective application. So, and there's justice for the these victims and the scrutiny on these organisations and individuals who do commit gross human rights violations. And like Niccolo said, the key aim of these sanctions framework is to stop the torture and to stop human rights violations in these countries, particularly in Bahrain. So I think all in all, it's really important that states do fully implement the sanctions in order to prevent human rights violations in the future.
Thanks. But you two, Amelie and Amy, if in your final year of studies you end up doing any essays or reflections on Bahrain and human rights, international human rights sanctions regime, please come back, share those with us, tell us what you found. If you've got any questions, you know where to find us. I want to come back to Said Yousif's as we're finishing now, and just in a minute. Said Yousif, Niccolo called your recommendations a shopping list. They're a great shopping list, a very ambitious and robust, an optimistic shopping list. Tara said she was an optimist at the very beginning. How optimistic are you that your shopping list can be something that you can go to the shop and buy?
Yeah, I mean, I also agree with Nicholas that it's about political will. So I think it's all about political will. I mean, will that everything is easy. We are not asking any complicated thing. So our message to the king, and my final thoughts to the king, that it's very basic. It's very clear that what we want is that the demand of the release of all the political prisoners in Bahrain, and it's a one decision. So it's all about decision. Doesn't need a lot of process. Number two is allowing civil society institution and independent press to operate freely without any punishment, consequence, retaliation, abolish death penalty, stop the torture, abide by international commitment, stop the discrimination against Shia. It is in everywhere, in every ministry, in every place. So it's about decision from the king in particular, that he asked for the stop of the discrimination against the Shia, and stop the hate speech in the official newspaper and the official TV. They are still making hate speech against the Shia. And also, so it's all about political will. Doesn't mean a lot of process. So that's my message to the king today.
Thanks so much, you all. I understand before we came on air, before we started broadcasting, there was a statement by something like the Bahrain cyber army, which said that, I don't know, like the secrets of these traitors will be revealed, or we're going to publish on how awful they are and how, I don't know, we're human rights violators and we killed all sorts of people. Whatever it was. But it sounded inflammatory. It sounded like defamation, and it was really awful. Just really, really awful. Look, Niccolo, Tara, Said Yousif, thank you so much. Thank you also to Amy and Amelie, two interns. You've given your time voluntarily, willingly. You've done a bit of research for us. You've now presented it. You probably presented on a couple of occasions. Thank you so much. That's really, really helpful. I think we end with a rather sad and sober note. It looked kind of pretty complicated at the beginning, but we end with a pretty simple message, it seems to me, which was, King of Bahrain, Bahraini authorities, just respect people, just be human, just sort yourself out. Really awful. And maybe with that we can end with some optimism looking into 2021, that maybe with increased, not surveillance, but with increased engagement with the EU human rights sanction regime, with the shopping list, the National Action Plan for Human Rights, with Salam being engaged with they were trying to holding them to account and offering this. Who knows? Maybe 2021 can be a little bit more happy. There's a smile on Niccolo's face. That's great. And Tara's. Excellent way to end. So with that, everybody, thank you so much. And good to see you smiling, at least at the very end. And have a good rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.